There is the saying, dogs are a man's best friend. I like that saying because obviously I like dogs. I've had several dogs throughout my life. Don't currently now, but it's because I live in an apartment and I just truthfully don't have the time to dedicate full time to raising a dog. It's a tangent though. Dogs are a man's best friend. When I look at people, the best way to determine somebody's actions is to be able to see kind of the totality of themselves through others. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you see somebody's parents, you start to get a good understanding of why they act the way they do. Whether positive, negative, neutral, it doesn't matter. When you see someone's parents, you start to realize, oh, this is why you're the way that you are. In the same fashion, when you pick somebody's 9 closest friends, if they have that many, maybe it's 4, 5, 1, 2, whatever. The amount also tells you a lot. Take that into perspective. Look at their friends, look at how their friends behave, look at how their friends act. It tells you a lot about them. For example, there's the saying that if you the 9 closest people you surround yourself with, you're going to be the 10th person that does so. If there's 9 successful people, you're going to be the 10th. On the other side of the coin, if there are 9 unsuccessful people, you'll be the 10th. So what does dogs are a man best friend mean? Well, dogs are domesticated. They're the domesticated species of wolf. They come from, originally, wolves. I won't go into all the genetics of it because I'm not a massive expert, but I know dogs were wolves, as all of us do. And it was originally when, a while ago, several thousand years ago, one human found a wolf, and the wolf liked him and had a predisposition towards not wanting to kill humans. And next thing you know, now we have hundreds of different dog breeds, all the way ranging from dogs that could fit in the pocket of my pants, all the way up to dogs that weigh as much as I do, potentially. There's such a diverse amount of dogs, and this video is not about dogs, although it is called domestication versus taming. I want to make a point. Dogs were not always man's best friend. It used to be horses, and before that, I don't know what it was, but the saying, dogs are a man's best friend, is interesting because when you take my aforementioned example of you being the kind of totality of your friends, I think it says a lot that man's best friend is domesticated. Domestication and taming are interesting to me because domestication is the act of turning something into a benefit or something that supports mankind. Whereas taming is taking something and then while it's still alive, turning it into something that benefits man, right? Dogs cannot survive out in the wild by themselves to a certain extent. A Chihuahua out in the wild is going to get killed. Plain and simple. The closer a dog resembles a wolf, the more of a chance of survival it has. But then you run into issues with certain breeds, so on and so forth. Domestication ultimately leads to you cannot survive without humans. Same thing with milk cows. If milk cows don't get milked, they will die from too much milk. Sheep today have been domesticated to the point where we have to shear them or else they will die of overheating or having too much mass, so on and so forth. Horses, to a certain extent, I've never had a horse, but I've heard from quite a few people that have had horses that there's kind of a joke that they do their best to kill themselves because when a horse breaks its leg, it's going to die. Right then and there, it's physiology, it's going to die. Wild horses, not an expert on that, but I would imagine wild horses are a little hardier, maybe not as dependent on man, obviously. And this goes all the way down into plants as well. There are certain plants that have proliferated because of human intervention. For example, wheat, barley, rice, corn. These things grow everywhere because of humans. Everywhere, all over the place. They might be, I'm not an expert, but I would definitely say they're up in the most numerous plants up there as far as how many there are compared to other plants, because we just grow tons of them. There's thousands, possibly millions of acres dedicated just to farming in America. But these plants weren't always that prolific. And even then, the plants that we have today, the corn that we have today, it's not the same corn as it was thousands of years ago. We selected for individual things through artificial selection, so on and so forth. We started to select for these behaviors to make these plants more domestic or animals more domestic. Now, as far as taming, we like to, there's kind of the saying, taming the beast, right? This big thing that's an example, a bear or a tiger or a lion. They're these exotic pets that you have to tame, but realistically, there's no way that we could domesticate those animals. We can't even domesticate zebras, for example. We can't domesticate deer, for example, because these species don't do well corralled and tightened into pens. When deer get corralled, they stress out and die. When zebras get corralled into an enclosure, they start killing each other. They're very territorial. Same thing with hippos. You could never domesticate a hippo because it would just start killing everything. And realistically, good luck building a fence tough enough to keep that hippo from breaking it down. So we domesticate animals and plants that are easy to domesticate. Big surprise. But the other ones we have to tame. Where am I getting at with this? Dogs are a man's best friend in the sense that man has begun the slow domestication process of itself. We have corralled ourselves into these dense cities. There are quite a few people that we would consider wild, or another word, rural, where they don't do well with a lot of people around. They get stressed out, they get anxious, they start to have a lack of purpose because they depend on this almost meta foundation that props itself up through the propagation of more humans and more humans moving into cities and more humans allowing themselves to give up certain freedoms, and not necessarily rights, but certain freedoms. For example, living in a big city, you give up the freedom of peace and quiet. You give that up. It's plain and simple that it is a freedom to have peace and tranquility and to not have a lot of cars honking, but you give that up when you move to a city. You give up lots of land when you move to a city. The ability to have acres out in the forest somewhere or the plains, you give up that ability. Instead, you trade it for a few hundred, or if you're lucky, a few thousand square feet. And that's all that you have. Now, you also get a degree of ability. For example, there's food everywhere. You don't have to drive 30 minutes to a grocery store, 45 minutes to a grocery store. You have a hospital very close to you. You have all of these amenities where you would not be able to survive without these amenities in the city. Cities have essentially domesticated humans because we have to give up certain aspects of our lives in order to have the big three guaranteed to us: food, water, and shelter. Food is plentiful in cities. I mean, it is so plentiful that even homeless people can eat, right? Like, I'm not saying that they have it easy at all. I'm just saying there's so much food that companies are throwing it out in the garbage, and these homeless people can come eat it. Shelter obviously is something that homeless people are lacking. That's a topic for another video where I talk about our identity with shelter. Anyway, water, I mean, there's pumps everywhere. I mean, it's just you trade the ability to have convenience to live in a big city, and so domestication essentially becomes convenience. Convenience is not necessarily good. When you have a lot of people in a big city, we see riots. Whatever the riots are about, you don't see riots in rural towns or even really protests. Why? Because there's just not a lot of people. Riots, protests, whatever people are protesting or rioting, they all have a kind of a collective reasoning, and so they create this kind of hive mind whenever they become domesticated. Because again, when you're in a big city, you have to trust so many other people to do the correct thing. But the issue is with crime rising when you get into dense cities. You have an issue with poverty when you get into big cities. There's no homeless people out in the plains of America. They're almost like, obviously there might be one or two, but really you only get homeless people in cities. I think that is awful. I think it's awful that there are humans out there that have to sleep on the streets every night. But isn't that interesting? They sleep on paved streets that were paid for by taxes to improve infrastructure. Some of them, not all of them, have homeless shelters that they can go to where they are getting, again, I am simplifying it, but they are guaranteed shelter if they can get into that homeless shelter. And so living in a big city, it just creates this unnatural, dispersonal environment. So much so to the point that in big cities, there are people with smaller and smaller pets that take up less square feet. Birds, fish tanks, snakes, whatever it may be. We domesticate our pets because we're domesticated in the city, so we have to get smaller. You can't have a horse and live in a high-rise penthouse of New York City, unless maybe if you're living in a high-rise in New York City, you might have one or two more properties, but you can't keep a horse in the middle of New York City. Now, where am I getting at with all of this? I think that domesticating yourself is not good. I think that humans have grown so accustomed to domesticating themselves throughout decades and decades of modernization and globalization that it's become kind of this new normal. But are we really better off? I want you to answer that question. Are you better off than your parents were? If you're Gen Z, odds are you probably aren't. Gen Z's one of the first generations where collectively they are worse off than their parents through multiple different statistics. Domesticating ourselves, scrolling on apps and placating our dopamine receptors and serotonin receptors through these false dopamine drips that just, I mean, that's peak domestication. Dogs, for example, Pavlov's experiment. You give a dog a treat and ring a bell, eventually you ring that bell and that dog mentally gets the dopamine hit of getting a treat. There are multiple apps on your phone right now that would not exist if Pavlov's experiment didn't exist. Or if the brain didn't do that when it started to associate a ringing of a bell with dopamine, or in our case, the swiping up with a thumb with dopamine. When I look at the American founding fathers and look at the beginnings of America, when I studied Arkansas and its rural beginnings, it's very fascinating because these men and women were not domesticated. They weren't one size fits all. They had these ambitions. They went out and they got land from the government, or bought land from the government and started expanding. Nowadays, we've become so domesticated that life, number one, seems foreign, but number two, people like the story of the cowboy. The whole cowboy era existed for only a few decades. The Wild West wasn't that long. You can fact check me, but I want to say something like the Wild West period lasted maybe only 30 years. But that has encapsulated so much of the social consciousness of humans that no wonder it does. That is something that all of us want, that ability to not be free, because I would argue that we are pretty free, and you get a lot of degree of freedom from domesticating yourself because a lot of these typical worries go away. But why is it that so many young men are turning away from that and wanting hard and wanting difficulty and strife, and they hate how easy their lives have become? It's because we've domesticated ourselves to the point that we're miserable. And so I'm calling upon a lot of people to tame themselves, not domesticate themselves. This is something that I had a realization about several years ago, where I realized in order to live in society, the trade-off for civilization and getting the big three met is taming yourself. But the issue is, in modern society, it is better to domesticate yourself because you are more docile, you are easier to control, you are more likely to consume things in the economy because that's the only way you can get dopamine, because there's no real strife. For most people, you don't have an issue getting food. For most people. Obesity is at 70% in America, probably higher now. 70% of Americans have too much to eat. %70 of Americans have too much to eat. That's how domestic we've become. Our favorite, if you're a steak enjoyer, you know that Wagyu is the pinnacle of steaks. That is literally cows that get so fat that all of that fat starts to go in between the muscle cells, and it creates a really juicy, tender steak. Our pinnacle for food is making animals obese. We have so much food that we can feed what we are going to eat enough to be obese, and then charge exorbitant amounts. Wagyu steak is delicious, by the way. I had it once in Poland. It was awesome. But that's besides the point. When you domesticate yourself, you simply become easier to manipulate. You consume more. You participate in the economy more. What would drive down the entire economy is by taming yourself. This whole system works right now by not taming yourself, but domesticating yourself. What do I mean by taming? Congressmen, and there was one case in Arkansas that I know for sure where a congressman dueled other congressmen over disagreements. That is uncivilized. We banned dueling because we saw it as uncivilized. However, I think there's something to be said about having such a strong conviction that you would be willing to die over it, and not just die in the quote-unquote war, but walk outside, grab your pistol, and the winner of the argument is the one that's still standing and doesn't need a casket. I'm not advocating for bringing dueling back. I'm just giving you an example of what it looked like to be kind of untamed. And so men like that are very disagreeable, sort of drive society forwards. And forwards is not always good, because any degree out of the 180 degrees, there are 179 degrees that you are going forward from your initial standpoint. So there's an entire area of the ability to go forward that does not necessarily mean it is the right path forward, but you are moving forward, you are progressing, so on and so forth. Taming yourself means continuing to be who you are at your core, who you are at your inner mechanics, right? Who is the I? You're keeping that true, but the you, the thing you project to other people, is what changes a little, right? When you are talking with somebody, you don't just cuss them out because you disagree with them. You engage in a debate or a argument, and you argue your side, and you try to use logic and language and the ability that we have as humans, this excellent reasoning ability. You use that, but you don't sway your core internal beliefs simply because it would be easier. You sway it because you were wrong. That's what taming yourself is. Domesticating yourself is when you just go with the flow and everything's fine. Hey, whatever you want to do it. That is, I think, libertarianism, where a lot of people are just, oh, well, as long as it doesn't harm anybody, it's fine. As long as it's not hurting anybody, it's fine. I disagree with that. I think there are definite goods and definite bads in the world, and that's also a video for another day, good versus bad, but there are definite positive things in this world and definite negatives, and when we just give up both of those to placate our neighbors, so that way it's just easier to get throughout the day, and oh, well, I'm not going to argue with this person over that because, well, I need to get to work on time, and so that way I can have enough food, so that way I can, I don't know, just live, just exist. There exists, let me rephrase that. You get into this life and this cycle of life where you're placating everybody, so you don't know what you actually believe, or you falsely believe that you don't care what others think, and you start to get this cognitive dissonance where this taming of yourself would not lead to that, because you would still have your personal convictions, you would still believe these things, and the quote-unquote successful people, I think, are the ones that can tame themselves, whereas there are successful people from certain definitions of success that domesticate themselves, and I think a good example of domestication would be the influencer. I think that's peak domestication, because you are making money off of placating certain people to buy a product that you may or may not own, but you get a percentage of it, and so you're essentially just in sales, but you curate this lifestyle that is hyper palatable to the niche or broad community that you are trying to target. That is why I don't want to become an influencer, which is kind of ironic that I'm making a YouTube video. I have no intentions of becoming an influencer. I hope I don't blow up. I kind of just do this because I enjoy talking about it, but the idea of making a living off of placating human beings, the entire consumeristic society, it's bad. Think about it. Are we better off? More people are buying stuff at record rates. You can get same day shipping from Amazon. That's awesome, I guess. Like, that's very convenient, but at the expense of losing a neighbor who would have loved to have a vitamin shop where they sell supplements, and you know them personally, and you deal with cash, and the ability to have a grocery store where you know Marge, the owner, and that grocery store has been in her family for 100 years. That's what we're losing out on. Instead, some faceless person from Amazon drops off a package, and you get an alert on your phone, and you go grab the package, open it up, you don't talk to anybody. In fact, there exists today the ability for humans to not have to interact with anyone. It is entirely possible, which terrifies me, that you could be on unemployment or disability and just collect these checks, and I'm not saying these are bad, but this is a terrifying reality where, or working from home, where you get a salary without having to personally interact with anybody, and then buy your food and your apartment, set up all auto pay, and you just never have to talk to anyone. That is meta domestication. That is, you have become so domesticated, you are not even an influence on other people. Not even positive or negative. You're not even an influence on other people. All you exist is to drive profit margins up. That's it. Or on the flip side, you could just have a job where you do the minimum amount of human communication, and then just DoorDash everything, or Instacart from Walmart. It's truly terrifying, because we're losing who we are at our core aspect of humans. We are losing that social aspect, that love of your fellow man. Why would I want to vote to make the world a better place when I just see myself as a one person in a million person or more city? Why would I care about improving the world when I've kind of got everything I need? Why would I care about somebody that is my fellow human? Why would I care about them? I don't even have to talk to humans to exist. That's terrifying. That's so terrifying. And the issue is we've domesticated ourselves. We've placated so much that we've lost that human aspect. So to tame yourself is to reflect on your own core values and to be disagreeable sometimes. Who cares if you're wrong? At least you tried. There's a quote by Teddy Roosevelt: the man in the arena is worth more than the man watching the arena. Regardless of whether if you put yourself out there to fail, and you've done more than anybody who's ever not stepped foot in the ring. Taming yourself, as opposed to domesticating yourself, is wanting more for yourself and wanting more for your family and wanting to have a family. I think it's very sad that a lot of men and women no longer want kids, because that is our biological purpose, number one. So if you don't have kids, it's by a cognitive choice. It's not for everybody, but the fact that there are a staggering statistic of people that are willingly choosing not to have kids is very telling. You've become so domesticated, you don't even want the possibility of raising something. Because a ultimately domesticated animal doesn't have to raise its offspring. Humans do it for them. An ultimately domesticated plant doesn't have to worry about spreading its own seed, because humans pollinate it and then plant it. We've become domesticated. And it's time to put a stop to it. You have to instead tame yourself. I'm not saying go be wild, go start just randomly getting into fights with people. This isn't Fight Club. But you have to stand for something. You have to start to want more for yourself, and that is what taming is. Taming yourself is allowing others to like being around you, but not giving up any of your human-centric consciousness. Not giving up the desire to be human and to experience and to live wild. Right? A tame tiger could go back into the forest and continue to do what it was doing. A tame bear could do the same thing. Now, if it was raised from birth like that, obviously there's biological differences, but I'm using it as a metaphor. A tamed animal can still go out and do what it was meant to do. But it also enjoys the ability of living in civilization. And so civilization initially was taming yourself so that way everybody, so the collective, could have a better life. But now we've domesticated ourselves to where now the individual has a worse life. Go out and be wild. Make some mistakes. Stand for something and then realize it's wrong and then change your mind. Just stand for something. Just do something. But don't ever, ever domesticate yourself. Because you're worth more than that.